All right, so this is 100% a hypothetical question, but if I woke up tomorrow morning and someone said, you can only have one lure for the rest of time, no matter where you went fishing, you can have one bait, what would it be? And I'm also very curious to know what your guys' questions would be, so leave them down below in the comments. But before I get into that one bait, I do want to let you know that this video is brought to you by my apparel company, Finn Fishing. It's the best way to help support this channel. I have USA-made sun shirts and a lot more USA-made stuff coming in the future. I'm really excited about it. All right, so let's get into the one lure that I would pick. And this, the reason that it took me, literally I thought about this for an hour because I thought of all the places I've gone to, you know, whether that's New York or Florida or North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Ohio, like so many different states, so many different bodies of water. What is the one lure that I could fish with that could really attack all different situations? And so to me, not only is this the one lure that I would pick for the rest of my life, but to me, this is also probably the most versatile lure that you can buy. And let's go ahead and tell you what it is. And that would be a jig. A jig and pig, just like this. And I'm gonna go over the specifics as to exactly why I chose this and the actual bait here. But the biggest reason is that, like I said, a jig is extremely versatile. I mean, you can fish this bait in really deep water. You can fish it in really shallow water. You can fish it in between. You can fish it in really muddy water. You can fish it in really clear water. You can mimic everything too with a jig. You can mimic a bluegill, a shad, a crayfish, everything that a bass eats. You can pretty much mimic it with a jig. And that is why I chose this bait, because I feel like no matter where I go, I can kind of trim up my jig and make it to kind of match what I am fishing very, very well. Now, if you want to know the very specifics about the actual jig that I would pick, it would be this one right here. This is a Strike King structure jig. And this particular jig, I think, was originally evolved for fishing kind of offshore. And it does that very well. But this jig to me is the most versatile out there on the market, because it's kind of like, if you look at the head on it, it's kind of a unique head. It's flatter, so it's kind of like an archy style jig, a football, and a swim jig all mixed together. And to me, this is the one jig that I like the most. It has a good hook gap, like we talked about a couple of videos ago. It has a great weed guard on it. It's just a really, really good jig, and it's a very, very versatile jig. I wouldn't want to pick like a football jig to fish in, you know, heavy cover or even swim it. But this is the jig that I would go with. Now, the big thing that I would do with this is kind of trim it down or leave it big and bulky. Well, actually, before I talk about that, let's talk about the trailer, because this is something else that I really had to think about, was the trailer. And this is the trailer that I would probably go with. This is the Berkeley Meaty Chunk, okay? This is a chunk style trailer. So when you pitch it out there in the water, it doesn't have kind of that crawl action where it goes like this in the water. And that's something that I really, really thought about, because there's really two different trailers that I use for a jig. There's the chunk style like this, and then there is the flapping crawl style trailer. And although when I fish a swim jig, I really like that flapping crawl style, I still catch a lot swimming a jig with just a standard trunk trailer, and it's the one that I primarily use when I'm flipping and pitching or skipping. So that's the actual trailer that I would go with. The reason that I would kind of also go with the Berkeley version is because of the MaxScent technology, and I was thinking about smallmouth. Like, if I'm going anywhere in the country, I'm obviously going to fish for smallmouth from time to time, and I really believe when it comes to MaxScent and smallmouth that it's unmatched. There is something about that, and so that's why I went with this specific trailer. Another trailer you could go with is like a Zoom Super Trunk trailer. That's a very similar trailer. It's the one that I actually first started fishing. But anyways, the big thing that I'm going to do with this jig is just kind of critique it to the situation that I am fishing. And so I'm going to trim it up or leave it big and bulky. Like right now, it's kind of big and bulky. If I'm fishing around a lot of bigger fish, or if I just want a bigger presence, maybe I know the fish are eating bluegill, that's kind of how I'm going to leave it. Really big and bulky. The skirt hasn't been trimmed at all. I'm hanging the chunk style trailer there, just make it a big presence. Now, if I wanted to make it look a little bit more crawfishy or finessey, or I'm fishing for smallmouth, then I'm gonna trim this bad boy up. And I'm trying to do this over my little trash bucket here. But you know, one thing I like to do a lot is trim it. This is what I learned from Gary Klein, a professional bass fisherman, is trim that jig right below where your hook shank is. So here's the bottom of my hook. My skirt is literally almost parallel with it. That to me is how I actually fish a jig a lot. And sometimes if I want it to be very compact, I'm just gonna thread this particular meaty chunk onto my jig. So instead of hanging it, I'm gonna thread it on there, push it over the keeper, and now I've got a little bit more of a finessey jig. This is the way I like to fish this thing a lot. This is also the way that I'm gonna fish it if I'm skipping the bait. If I'm skipping it way up underneath docks, this is the way that I'm gonna fish it. Now I do wanna talk quickly about color and the size weight that I would go with, because I think that those are important. And I would love to say that I'd be able to change colors, you know, using this one bait. But again, if I could only have one color, this is the color I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with a green pumpkin. To me, this really came down to either green pumpkin or black. I would like white because I love to swim a white jig, but I don't flip a lot of white jigs. I don't use a lot of white jigs other than swimming them. But a green pumpkin, you can swim it, you can flip it, you can do everything with it, and it works in really muddy water and very, very clear water. Black is another really good color that I feel like just straight black. You could do black and blue. That really kind of depends on what body of water that you fish most often. Now, when it comes to the size of the jig, again, I would hope that I'd be able to change my size up. If I had to pick just one size to go with for the rest of the time, I'd probably go with a 3/8, a 3/8 ounce. I fish a lot of 3/8. I do fish a lot of 1/2 ounce as well. The biggest reason I would go with a 3/8 over a 1/2 ounce though is because I like to swim a jig and I like to fish a jig in really cold water. And when I swim a jig, I prefer to have a lighter jig, sometimes even going to a 1/4 ounce, because I like to float that jig, keep it really high in the water column and really like just below the surface. Bass really, really like that. And using a 1/2 ounce in that situation, you would just have to keep that bait coming so quick that I think you would miss out on fish. The other thing is that fishing a bait in cold water, I preferably like a 3/8 because it has a little bit slower fall rate than a 1/2 ounce. And I really believe that that helps you to get more bites. So guys, that's it. If I could have one bait for the rest of my life, it would be this jig right here, set up exactly like this. And I would match the color of my trailer to the jig. Now, if you want to know what I talked about earlier, which is hook gap, there's two main things that I look for that really point out a good jig. And I'm going to leave that in the video that I did right here. So thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.